Sorry, I know I'm late, but I will be there as soon as I possibly can. I just wanted to start with, first of all, I'm excited to talk about the future of work, AI, automation, all that stuff, but that's absolutely nuts and completely unnecessary. I'm excited about what we've done at South Bay. Well, okay, that's actually really cool, let's be honest. It doesn't have to be complete replacement of humans and robots and us versus them. It's not this dichotomy that we're talking about. We're going to have a conversation about what matters in the AI transformation, and I don't think it has to be this ridiculous conversation about us being replaced by robots, by AI. Although that is actually pretty cool. I'll see you in a minute. I'll be right there.
All right, thank you for waiting. I'm sorry about the gibberish. I know it's hard to understand me. I was running because I wanted to be with you. Thank you for spending your morning with me. Good morning. Bom dia, minha família brasileira. Yeah, I knew you'd show up. All right. My name is Ian Beacraft. I'm the CEO of Signal and Cipher, and I spend most of my time doing a lot of crazy things with new technologies so we can figure out what we do with this stuff. I was actually not sure if most of you would show up today because I'm sure the rest of the programming sound a little bit like this.
AI, generative AI, generative AI, generative AI, AI as AI, 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 AI. It uses AI to bring AI, 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 AI.
And good night. So thank you. I know everyone's buffer has overrun. We're kind of sick and tired of talking the same thing all the time, but hopefully we'll have a fun conversation with this one. Given the last couple weeks, we've all been told a lot of different things. AI is important, or you know what, in this case, it's actually old news. Large language models don't matter anymore. It's now energy-based models. And oh, by the way, China also sent out another shot saying AGI is here and we're all cooked. Maybe, maybe not. This has actually been reverse engineered, and we're seeing that it's actually more of a Claude wrapper than a really ground-shifting moment. But a lot is happening no matter what. And the tension, the whiplash that we're all experiencing right now is actually reminiscent of a moment that was pretty prominent almost 200 years ago. And that's this one. I want you to imagine for a second that you are a construction worker who's shown up to the job site in 1827. And your job, essentially, is to shovel earth so that you can build. And you see this thing. What's your reaction? We're cooked. Like, I can't compete with that thing. I can't compete with something that can do 10,000 times what I'm physically capable of, 100 times faster. It's just not possible. I see no other alternative to, I have to go find a new line of work. But we have the benefit of hindsight. All of us in this room know it didn't turn out that way. The construction industry didn't end overnight. It wasn't run by 5 people in machines. In fact, the industry itself has never been better. But that foresight wasn't something that we had easy access to, and we're kind of sitting in a similar moment right now, where we've been told time and time and time again that technology tends to create jobs, it creates opportunity. But we see so much evidence right in front of us of things that we do, that we create value with, that these things are so much better at us than. So what do we do with that? Well, first we have to figure out what we've actually seen in terms of technology changing landscapes. And let's stick with the construction analogy for a while. Because of the advances in technology around construction, we were able to completely change the landscape of the world. We didn't just build more, faster, and for less. We decided we were going to change the way that we build because we have this technology. If you take a look at the landscape of Dubai, a city like that would never have been possible without a complete embrace of the technological advancements in architecture and urban design. I mean, a complete landscape change from 2000 to 2018 like that is absolutely mind-boggling. So if we embrace technology, we have the opportunity to completely reshape not just our physical space, but also now the cognitive one. And it really does enable us to do all sorts of things that were not possible previously. new types of buildings, new types of architecture that we could not do on our own, but with collaboration with machines, a partnership, all of a sudden new things become apparent, but we have to spend the time and the work to do it. And Winston Churchill has a very famous quote. It says, "We shape our buildings and then they shape us." Apropos of the architecture analogy, but I like to say a little bit differently. We shape our tools and thereafter they shape us. Not Winston Churchill. He was a big VR fan, by the way. But one of the challenges that we have with this is that when we encounter a paradigm shift, the mental models of yesterday collide head-on with the technologies of tomorrow. We tend to apply what we know about the past to the things that we're encountering with the future because we don't know how to navigate that terrain yet. I see this, it looks like this, let's treat it the same way. How many of you, raise your hand, treated ChatGPT just like you treated Google when you started using it for the first time? That should be all of you. For those of you who haven't, get some more caffeine. I get it. It's early. It's only noon. But the point here is that we don't have a vocabulary or a context for these things yet unless we've spent a lot of time with them. And this is traditional to all new media. In fact, when we had new media like the television or even the car, we treated them like the ones that we had experience with. The first car was literally a horse buggy with an engine on it. The first TV show was a radio show with a camera in front of the host. The same thing with the first electric light bulb. It was a physical replica of the gas lamp. We do these things because we're trying to take the familiar, the unfamiliar, and make them familiar, but also to find a stepping pattern that we can step out of the past into the future in rather than a full leap. Those are difficult to do. One of the challenges with paradigm change, though, is they change the systems that we live within. And this is something I think we are all feeling right now, that our systems are fraying. And I'm not just talking about technology, but this is important to think about AI as well, because AI is not just a technology. It's not just a technology issue. It's an economic issue. It's a social issue. Hell, it's even a religious issue. So when you think about how ingrained it is in all different parts of our lives, when we're going through a moment in time where everything seems to be shifting, there's a lot that we have to think about. And it's no wonder we take mental shortcuts with the technology and say, it looks like something I know, and therefore that's how I'm going to treat it. It's because we're all freaking out about so much. I mean, he's got a point. But the work for us is that we have to lean in and think about transformation, not optimization. We're moving into a world we're not just looking for incremental returns anymore. If we're truly going to embrace a general purpose technology, one that will actually reshape society, that's a paradigm shift. That's going to require a complete transformation, not just incremental steps in the right direction. So we need to be focusing on reinvention versus optimization. So let's talk about paradigms for a moment. Paradigms are the ultimate bias. They are the things that determine how we see the world. They determine what we see, what we value, what we measure. We all live in a world where what we measure seems objective. Our KPIs, our metrics seem unquestionable, unwavering, but those actually come from the highest bias of all, and that's the paradigm that we live within. That's part of why this feels so pervasive right now, why it feels like there's so much instability. It's because it is actually a truly transformational change that we are moving into. We're moving into a period of transition. We're no longer living in a stable era of structure and knowledge. So we really are attempting to do something we really shouldn't be, actually. When we look at the world through the lens of the past, it's kind of like we're navigating with the stars when we have a GPS in our pocket. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to try and break this down into 5 core topics that I think are going to shed some light on what it looks like to work within an organization that is leaning into this. I don't say mastered this, because there is no such thing as an organization that has yet. We still don't know what this looks like. We're still discovering it. We're still going into uncharted territory, but those that are going there the fastest and with the most intent are starting to find out what that territory looks like. So the first, skills are the new data. The problem, though, is that the shelf life for skills is collapsing. What I mean by that is that we have kind of a pretty firm construct of what it's like to learn something and how long that should serve us. And in the 20th century, we kind of had the ability to lean on one skill and say that would carry us for most of our career. Because skills would last about 30 years before they were out of date. The one career path or one job type of career was actually pretty prevalent for a long period of time. Obviously, that is ancient history for all of us in the room, because things have changed a bit. It looks a little bit more like this for us now, where we're also going to school for the first 18 to 22 years of our life, spending anywhere from 30 to 45 years in our working world, and then hopefully after that, retirement. But we've experienced a little bit more friction and fluctuation in our careers, because it doesn't take 30 years for a skill to go out of date. In fact, in the beginning, maybe you got 10 years out of it, and then it shrank and it became 5. And for a lot of technical skills right now, it's about 2.5 years before a skill goes from relevant to irrelevant. And that's going to shrink more and more and more as time goes on. In fact, we're getting to a point in the next 30 years where this could change even more so. Now, by the way, you did just see that lifespan go up significantly, because in this next century, we could easily be living to 120 years. And boy, don't you get excited about that 60-year career. I'm going to sweeten the pot for you, too, because in that 60-year career, 6-month skill cycles, baby. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to soil my pants just thinking about that, because that could actually be a reality for us in many ways, but we don't have any idea of how to deal with that. I don't. And this is what I study nonstop, because we haven't spent that time in that space. We don't have any infrastructure for it. We have no reference for it. It's something that we're going to have to figure out together. But this is the world that we're moving to. We're moving to a world where skills are rapidly changing in terms of their value time and time and time again. The only way that we can solve this is by understanding what AI can do for us. There's an inside joke in the AI industry that the only way to solve problems with AI is more AI. And there's a little bit of truth to that. So since the shelf life is collapsing, we need to think about different forms of value. Like, if my value is not from what I do, what is it? It changes from I am what I know to I am how I adapt. Adaptation is going to be key. It's the #1 thing that we need to think about in terms of how we navigate this space. And it's interesting because there's a dichotomy and a paradox that comes from this. If we think about the skills that are valuable right now, let's say prompt engineering and coding, they actually double in ROI every 6 months right now, because of the power of LLMs getting better and better and better. Those who know how to code are far more efficient and effective. Those who know how to prompt are far more efficient and effective, not because they got better, but because they know how to use the tools that are also getting better. But on the flip side of that coin, most of us have heard that eventually there will not be any coders. Programming's dead. I'll tell you, trust me, the skills around computer science are not going to be over anytime soon. But the actual act of writing code might be something that is long forgotten in a short order of time. So we're in this space where those skills are more important than they've ever been right now, but also more at threat of being completely valueless. We're in a place of what I call skill flux. This is a space where a skill can increase in importance exponentially and be completely dismissed at a moment's notice from a left hook, a ChatGPT moment, a Devon engineering moment. These are the types of cycles we can come to expect, where there are skills that we need to lean into in order to keep pace with technology in a way that builds momentum and advantage, but understanding that skill is also at risk. And this is not something that will happen once or twice. This will be a cycle that continues to repeat itself. So that calls into question the way that we learn, the way that we teach ourselves, the way that we go through school and education. We spend the first quarter of our lives in school, and then most of us never go back. The idea of compartmentalizing learning in that space does not prepare us for a world like this. So we have to be moving into a completely different model. So what does that mean? I mean, honestly, the next war for talent won't be about engineers or coders. It's going to be about two things: rapid skill acquisition and then time to application of that skill. It's not enough that you know it. How quickly can you go from knowing it to applying it? How quickly can you go from applying it to mastering it? And are you resilient enough to do that over and over and over again? We call this surge skilling. And this is going to reshape the training and education market. This is something that will completely change the way that we do go to work and go get our education. Going to a university for 2 years may be a baseline, but universities are going to have to figure out how they do things like micro-credentialing and real-time training and real-time access to skills. So when we think about education and what we're building, we have to build tools that can teach in an adaptable fashion. This is from a workshop that we did recently, but when we actually build workshops and training, regardless of where it's happening, the systems themselves actually have to adapt to the users rather than just expecting the users to learn from the system. This is one of the changes that is enabled by AI because it's one of the first technologies that can adapt to you. Every other technological paradigm has forced us to adapt to it. From learning how to use a graphical user interface, a mouse, a keyboard, these are all learned skills. Working with an ERP, also something we had to adapt to. Finally, we're in a space where technology can adapt to us. But one of the challenges around this is that we spend so much money on the technology, on the licenses, on the infrastructure, but the amount of money that we spend on learning and development, education, or any other factors that AI even touches is a shadow of that. And we're going to feel that. Because that is such a disparity, that's going to create an enormous amount of disruption. And it's going to put us in a place where we're forced to go find our own ways of learning and unlearning and creating value for ourselves. So the second thing I want to talk to you about is the neurology of change. I said adaptability is the most important factor in skill set that you can have. This is not new, it's actually pretty cliche, but the problem is no one ever tells you how to do it. They say learn, unlearn, relearn, but no one ever says how. And that's going to be really important because we have to unlearn 25 years of digital behaviors in order to move to this next paradigm. That's not easy. That's incredibly difficult. So I want to actually fix this. And we're going to do something together. It's about to get really loud in here. So if you have an issue with loud noises, I just want to give you a heads up. It's going to be a loud noise floor because we're about to do an exercise together. This is a participatory exercise. So all of you who didn't raise your hand earlier, you don't get a free pass. What we are going to do is I'm going to put you into a liminal state. This is not a magic trick, something we'll do together. And we're going to learn and unlearn a pattern together. So what I want you to do is I want you to find someone to your left or to your right, and you're going to point to them, and you're going to pair up. It's groups of 2. Point to the person and make sure that you've got that person with you. I see a bunch of you still staring at me. You're doing the wrong thing. All right. That's right. Here's some murmurs, meeting some new people. I see a lot of you still staring at me. What the heck? I've got all day. All right, I'm going to give you about 10 seconds more to figure this out. Awesome. Okay, if you haven't figured it out by now, tough toenails. So here's what we're going to do. There's going to be a leader and a follower. And the leader is going to move their hand up, down, left, or right. And the follower has to mirror that. And we're just going to do this for 20 seconds at a time. And all you're doing is following their hand. So we're going to start, okay? So face to the person next to you. And we're going to 20 seconds to the leader. So 20. All right, now I want you to switch. So the leader becomes the follower becomes the leader. I'm really just doing this for my own entertainment, by the way. This has nothing to do with the show. I actually am, but it is really fun to watch. So we're going to take this up a notch. We've synced a little bit. So everyone's engaged. We're all here together. You've probably connected. Maybe you've met the love of your life. But now we're going to make this a little bit more difficult. So lovers might be fighting by the end of this. What we're going to do, instead of mirroring the person and staying in lockstep, you're now going to do the opposite of what that person does. So if I'm going right, you're going left. If I'm going up, you're going down. If I'm going left, you're going right. Okay, so take a second to think about that before you do it. Opposites. Pick a leader and a follower. We're going to do this for 20 seconds. All right, switch. The leader becomes follower, follower becomes leader. All right, and stop. Give yourselves a round of applause. See, the real trick is I now know who I want to be friends with, because some of you are being real jerks to your partners. Okay, that was stage 2. We're going to up the ante a little bit more. Now, I know, I heard a bunch of groans. That was great. So what we're going to do is, as the leader, I'm going to call out a direction I am not going in. So I'm going to go right, and I can say up, down, or left. If I go down, I can say up, left, or right. But my follower has to follow my hand and ignore the audible cues. All right? Give yourself a second to chew on that. 5, 4, 3, and start. All right, and switch. And 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're done. All right. Can't do that. All right. So that was tough, right? Like, that was challenging. We've got one more. Yes! This time, you're just going to mirror each other again for 10 seconds. So pick your leader, and for 10 seconds, mirror. 10, 9, And switch. All right. And now, we are officially at the end of the ride, ladies and gentlemen. Please give yourselves a round of applause. That was awesome. I honestly had no idea how that was going to go. I've done that in rooms of a few hundred before, but not several thousand. So kudos and thank you. But that was difficult. Like that, I'm sure some of you probably have a headache from that. But what was happening during that exercise were actually several things. First of all, leaders had to become followers, and followers had to become leaders. This is a dynamic that has to be present in every organization during times of change. When we don't know the terrain and there's no established order, hierarchy, metrics, or way forward, we have to be able to dynamically adapt, and the ranking hierarchy does not matter. We each find our way together, and the adaptability between rank and role has to be subservient to what we're actually able to do. So that adaptability was a part of that exercise. Beyond that, what happened is we were creating patterns. Your brain was kind of wiring neurons together as it started to learn that pattern. So when you first mirrored, it wasn't too difficult, but we had to get used to it, and then we got used to it quickly. And then all of a sudden, the pattern changed. We had to unlearn that pattern and learn something new. And then it got more difficult, and it got more difficult. And all of a sudden, like, it went from just being kind of difficult to, wow, this is a pain in my ass. And it got uncomfortable, right? How many of you noticed that your body started tensing up? Yeah, I heard a guffaw there. That's because it's not just your brain that's engaged. Your body also knows that something's happening. Your body was just as involved in helping you create that new pattern as your brain was, because the body's also keeping score. This is actually something called somatic intelligence. And the reason this is important is because when we focus on AI, we focus on one form of intelligence. Intelligence is actually multidimensional. There are dozens of forms of human intelligence, but we don't talk about that. And we are exclusive of all of that when we talk about business and how we guide ourselves through business. So I mentioned a minute ago that followers become leaders, leaders become followers. And I've got a few more elements of what happens for what we resist uncertainty. I don't know if they're showing up here. I think it's still following me. So we'll shift back to the slides. But what I would encourage you to do is when you return to your teams, ask yourselves, what processes, what things are still serving us? What things do we know to be true? And what things might we want to investigate a little bit further? Because as we encounter this new paradigm, typically we are biologically wired to resist change. We just experienced that in this exercise. In fact, the point of this exercise was I wanted you to feel that discomfort, to step into that and get to the other side of it. Because what typically happens when we learn something is we get to that space of discomfort and we stop because it's uncomfortable. But just on the other side of that is the reward. So when I asked you, did you feel something in your body? I want you to look for cues of that discomfort, wherever they may come. And hopefully you can have the skills to label it, observe it, and inquire, what does that mean? Because you're going to be getting a lot of that. If we are truly moving into a world where skills are changing, the terrain is changing, everything seems like it's shifting underneath our feet, you need to pay attention to what your brain and your body are telling you. Because that is how you're going to help navigate change. So, understand your multiple intelligences. Because right now, we only talk about cognifying intelligence in AI. And if we are trying to compete with the machines when it comes to cognitive intelligence, we've already lost. There has to be more to it than that. So the next one, small data is the new big. when we talk about training AI and training models, the image that's usually conjured is this mountain of data. We just went through the big data era. The more data, the better. All data is great. I think we've kind of learned some lessons from that. But small data, high signal data, is actually going to be one of the most profound and what HP knew, it would be 3 times its size. And I would argue in today's paradigm, if HP knew what HP knew, that's off by an order of magnitude. Because if we actually have our data accessible and usable by AI, the amount of scale and efficiency we can get is absolutely insane. So why does this matter? Well, LLMs will actually, as they commodify, because LLMs are becoming a commodity, they're not becoming this thing with a massive moat anymore. Every time one model advances, the others catch up within days. They will make you average. Models themselves are essentially a series of averages, and if all you do is use the model as it is, you will be just at benchmark. There's no divergent extra value that comes from that. And this is why. Large language models have codified almost 99% of all available human knowledge. And as a result, there's little outside that we can use when we talk about using generalized knowledge. So we need to focus on divergent value. What does that mean? So as the cost of access to unlimited knowledge goes to 0, the value of proprietary knowledge and experience goes way up. Absolutely sky high. And for enterprise and for us personally, the real value is going to be coming from codifying your internal knowledge, your personal knowledge, your enterprise knowledge, your team's knowledge. Because these LLMs have been trained on 99% of the entire internet. But less than 1% of corporate, enterprise, and personal data has been trained on. So this actually becomes one of the unique advantages an organization can have. If we start to codify the knowledge that we have in our organizations effectively and can use this as a layer on top of these large language models, all of a sudden we create enormous value. And people think that we need lots of data to do that. We really don't, actually. And I'm going to show you what this looks like. Because we really just need small amounts of data that are really well structured, clean, and organized. So what would a series of data points look like for, let's say, a marketing department or a communications department that wants to make really effective use of a large language model? Well, it would just be, honestly, a really well-refined series of these types of documents. Brand, tone, and overview. Key value propositions. Your unique selling points, your product details. Communications and samples of Q&A. It's not just every point of data you can throw at it. It is well-refined, pure examples of these types of things that can become a reference for these types of documents. So let's get into this world and see what this could look like and take an example company. And I just randomly picked a company called Rubrik. They're a cybersecurity company. And what we're going to do is analyze their website, really honestly just any document, for a tone of voice, a style, and how they communicate about themselves. Now, this is purely for an example's case. We're not actually doing this here. But if we were to take their internal documentation and use this, we would start with essentially codifying it in a way that looks a little bit like this. So they might actually have documents on documents on documents. And all I want for my tone of voice is about 6 or 7 lines to instruct a large language model to operate in a certain way. Now, this is one fraction of a communications document, but what this is doing is acting as a lens and a layer on top of my large language model to instruct it how to operate. This doesn't seem very revolutionary. But when you do this for all of the types of communications and documentation in your company, when you codify your governance, the legal considerations, everything for project management and process, all of a sudden, all of the groups in your organization have codified things that can now sit on top of your large language models. And that acts as a way of diffusing knowledge across the organization. Essentially what happens here is that anyone can walk in off the street use your tools, your large language models, and your documents to make sure that they can write the next social media campaign in your voice. That when they communicate with your stakeholders, they're doing it in a way that is approved and aligned. It's taking a lot of the friction of upskilling, knowledge drain, alignment, meetings, approvals, CYA, out of the picture. What we call corporate waste. The stuff that gets in the way of actually doing the work. Because we spend 13% of our time looking for the documents we need to do our jobs. Think about that. That's about 33 days of the year finding stuff. We spend another 37% of our time in meetings, talking about the work, moving the work forward. 50% of our time is work that's about the work. Funny, but I know we're all feeling it. But that's what this does. It's beautifully simple, and it takes away a lot of that unnecessary work about the work. So, there we go. If I was able to take this and actually pour it into an application, I'm going to show you what that would look like. So not only am I able to take this information and put it as a lens on my large language model, once this knowledge is distilled, it's incredibly portable. It is not just stuck in a particular type of document, like a Word document or Excel document or a Tableau dashboard. It's something that is portable to almost any environment possible. We prefer to do a lot of this stuff in JSON, which is essentially the universal language of the internet. And what we end up doing is we can create these abstractions for all sorts of documentation and actions within a company. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to kind of create a situation between an agency and a brand building a campaign. And typically what this would look like is there's a briefing that happens, there's research that goes into the brief, the briefing is prepared as a really nice document that took a long time to create, and then the briefing happens, and that paper gets distributed to everybody at the table. Everyone reads it, discusses it, and says, okay, well, what do we do with this? We interrogate it together, and then over time we get to an alignment on, yes, we agree to this, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to move forward. And then we get to the fun part, which is the ideation and the creative part of this. Now, there's a lot of abstraction that has to happen at that table by every single brain in that room. Whereas what we could do instead is actually have our brand guidelines, our agency strategy, our governance and our legal layers codified in ways that that information is portable across all of our systems. And instead of dealing with pulling details and putting them in paragraphs in Word documents, we are collectively able to pull that information together in real time and discuss it together, creating an opportunity to collaboratively brief and turning a brief document into an active verb, a briefing, not a brief. That changes the direction and the texture of that engagement. So the briefing becomes something we actively do together. And during that time, we can also have AI visualizations happening because we're able to port that information into our large language models and our image generation to get into some sort of ideation pretty quickly. Or if I actually want to get more into it, I don't just have to ask the strategist who wrote the brief or the project manager who wrote the kickoff document. I can say, you know what? I kind of want to talk to one of our synthetic personas about this and ask them some questions about how they might respond to some of these things that are in this brief. And typically the way you would do that is you'd write another persona document and maybe make some guesses about what that would look like. But I mean, that's kind of like a very traditional persona document. But if I take the persona details that I have about my core target audience and I layer that with my brand details, all of a sudden I can have an actual conversation with a synthetic persona that can help me start to refine and sharpen my insights. Now, I am not in any way saying this should replace communication with real human beings, but working with synthetic personas can sharpen those insights before you start going into focus groups and spending time with those human beings asking them questions. Now, I'm really leaning into this brand and agency-specific scenario, but hopefully you're able to keep track with me here and see that this could be applied to any type of project kickoff in terms of how we're using data to interact in ways that was previously impossible. So now we're moving into ideation. And if we're moving this data around, we're able to actually have this help us, oops, went a little bit too fast, help us sift and sort. So it's actually going to know, based on the ideas we're coming up with, since it has a governance layer, a legal layer, a communications layer, it can actually do QA on all these ideas to see which ones are going to pass compliance, which ones are actually going to be legally compliant. So if you're doing something in pharmaceutical or any regulated industry, that's incredibly important. And it'll make sure that those are all tagged and flagged. So the ones that actually do make it forward will have to be in some form of review, but you've already made it so much more efficient, and we're working with really high quality work. So what could that look like? Let's say I actually had a conversation with my avatar that was actually supposed to be a conversation I didn't play. But I find out that my avatar, they are a cybersecurity buyer. We're talking about Rubrik here. And I find that they tend to keep up to date on things through things like white papers and all sorts of conferences, but they actually really get excited about things that are more interactive, like capture the flag events and hackathons and stuff like that. So the other thing I know about their persona is they're actually really into things like vintage video games. Well, what I could do is start to recombine some of these things into an ideation format and automatically prototype some form of capture the flag game that helps teach the concepts of the product value of Rubrik's system. And yes, that's actually a DSPy prompt that is built from this exact example. And that ideation session came from an overlay of an existing prototype in a matter of seconds. So what we're getting to, what you just saw, was going from codifying your internal knowledge base of legal, brand communications, all the brand work, and how that can be portable all the way into the ideation that you do and get to prototyping quickly. This is one example that could be thousands. So it allows you this flexibility to be fast and nimble by using this data. Small data, high signal data, not big data. So it really does become your foundation to scale. Now let's talk about our incentives and our metrics. Because what gets measured gets made. And one of the problems we're having right now is we are so focused on efficiency and scale, because that is the most important metric for a world that is built from the industrial paradigm. And those metrics of efficiency and scale have made productivity a religion. We're so stuck in this idea that the industrial paradigm is everything that we should know that we don't really know how to move into a space that is not built for structure, speed, scale, and efficiency. Known paradigms are ones that we can lean into structure and scale and efficiency for. When we move into unknown territory, those metrics can actually impede us. They can be the enemy in many ways, because they eliminate the opportunity to spend time thinking creatively, pausing, and assessing what is actually going on and happening here. So to be successful, we actually have to think about metrics and objectives and goals differently. We need to think about things that are a little bit more around innovation and novelty, social and ethical impact. These feel pretty squishy on the board, so let's actually put some metrics behind those things. Things like breakthrough rate, novel insight scores, your knowledge integration index. How fast are you integrating new knowledge into the organization, both at the technological level as well as the individual level? Exploration and commercialization. These are ways of getting to things that are squishy concepts and putting real hard numbers behind them. Because if you do this, you create the right behaviors. Because if you show me the incentive, I will show you the result. One of my favorite quotes from Charlie Munger. And I think we've all seen this with social media, and we're seeing it with the systems that are around us now, and that's part of why they're fraying. The incentives to these systems are at odds with the state of the world that we're in right now. So there are some companies that figured this out pretty well, actually. It might be kind of hard to see that, but this is called the Lean AI Startup Board, and this is a list of companies, startups that are at or above 5 million ARR and under a certain number of employees. And many of these companies are averaging about $3.5 million per employee. That's a pretty high ARPE. That's awesome. And that's because they're leaning into these types of philosophies around management. They're not focused on the same types of paradigms we've been stuck on for the last 150 years. They are leaning into AI native models, and they also do believe that the small team is the ultimate flex. So the AI era demands different metrics, metrics that talk about capability and capacity, not optimization and scale. So those look a little bit like this. We're not looking at just predictability and output. We're looking at adaptability and resilience. These are the types of things that kind of shift the paradigm of where we are from growth and efficiency to being able to explore and think about change. Let's take a little bit of a remix last year when I introduced the concept of creative generalist. And for those of you who didn't see that, creative generalist essentially is a concept that we all went to school in an era that said, go to school, get a job, build your career, build depth, and that creates a defensible career. But what AI does, it abstracts the years of discipline, expertise, and experience necessary to perform proficiently in lots of things that you don't do well. Notice I said proficiently and not at an elite level. But in progress, good enough is often good enough. So we've been working on this for a while. See, what does it actually look like in practice, and how do we put numbers, metrics, structure, and practice into this? And I want to talk about how we actually create that synergy between experts and creative generalists. And we've leaned into this idea of creating and mapping augmented teams. So I'm going to show you in a minute what it actually looks like to map skills across a team to create a team of creative generalists. And these are the 6 steps that are really important to understanding how skills overlap, how they can be augmented by AI, and how you can build, rebuild, and reformat your teams at a moment's notice based on the challenges that they are encountering. Interesting paradigm, right? I mean, that's not how we do things today. But the first is defining the functions, understanding that jobs and roles are not unique elements themselves. Jobs are a collection of tasks. And those tasks can actually vacillate between roles and positions. And as one task is automated, it doesn't mean the job goes away. It means the job shifts and adjusts. So we're going to actually go down and talk about a map of adjacent skills and see how we consolidate responsibilities amongst them. What you see up here is actually a map of different job positions. Those are the large spheres here. And then the lines that come out of them are the actual different responsibilities and tasks that are the agency or organization would be responsible for. As you can see, there's lots of cross-section amongst all of these. So to get there, we're going to have to start understanding how do we actually identify potential for augmentation for an individual. And we're going to look at the workflow. We're going to look at their bottlenecks, what's happening as a process inside the organization, to start identifying the right opportunities to either augment, automate, or replace. And what I'm going to do here is actually lean into where some of these skills are touching across multiple roles. And in this graph, we've essentially codified the roles with the tasks. And that's why you see a lot of connection here. So we've got trend analysis as one of those skills. And not only do I have the brand strategist, I have market research, digital strategist, creative director, and marketing strategist. So even your creative director can actually be doing trend analysis with the assistance of AI. That actually doesn't sound all that revolutionary now, but had I talked about that 5 to 7 years ago, there are so many people that would have had a conniption fit over something like that. So it starts to allude to the fluidity of these tasks and how they can be attached to different roles in different contexts. Things like reporting and dashboards. That's also something that doesn't have to be attached to one individual. This is attached to a whole bunch. Again, as teams are changing, so can the responsibility for this. These individuals may not all be available at one point in time. So you're using the resources you have available to you, the knowledge of who knows what, to dynamically start to shape and form your teams based on the challenge you have in front of you, the resources, and the augmentation of your AI. So what does it look like to actually start to rank these things? Well, let's take a look at our copywriter and our traffic manager. So we're looking at adjacent possible skill sets, which we listed. Then we've looked at an augmentation level, which essentially is stating how much would they, as an individual, be augmented by AI to understand where the biggest gaps are, and those are great opportunities for them to step into that role or that task. The role average augmentation is really speaking to how much that role is usually augmented versus the individual. And then the role rating, which is just kind of showing how much it's being impacted by AI overall. So this is almost like a forced ranking of what type of augmented adjacent possible skill sets we can bring to the table. So just to give an example, a copywriter could also start leaning into technical SEO, Copywriters are great at taking concepts and being able to write them out and express them concisely. SEO has a little bit of that type of dynamic too as well, but technical SEO is something that requires some expertise and experience. But with AI, it also allows them to augment themselves to a point where they can be proficient enough to do the work. Notice I said proficient, not elite. So we're taking into consideration the dynamic of the environment as well. So when we think about how this comes together, when tasks are automated in traditional jobs, our employment is threatened because we're extracting the value that each person provides and saying, you don't do that anymore. That's threatening to me. That creates anxiety in the workforce. But in the world of AI, where every single release and new capacity also expands the space and sphere of impact for that individual, that actually grows larger, faster than these shrink. That's not easy for people to understand, though. Just because I said that doesn't mean that everyone gets to get in that space easily. So we are truly charting new terrain for all of this. This is new for all of us. And this is kind of the world where we're moving into, where this is actually very easy for creative generalists to do, but we're not all that way. And we're moving into a world where if we wanted to, we could all make this work. But that's not easy, because we are moving into a space that isn't something we've all grown up with. We are charting this new territory together at the same time, but it's a lot like walking into this room with the lights off. Finding your way around, stubbing your toe, mapping it, and getting to understand it only through intimate experience. But if we want to really do this right, we're going to have to bring a lot of people along for the ride. Because there's problems of access, there's issues of understanding, there's paradigm shifts that we all have to go through, and it's not going to be easy. Some of this shit's going to break, and we have to be okay with that. But we have to be more okay with taking action to make sure we fix it. Because AI is going to do amazing things for us, but it also amplifies the entire spectrum of the human spirit. AI can do amazing things and also cause enormous amounts of destruction. But it's not something we sit here passively and just observe. It is our actions on a daily basis that shape the direction of that. And one of the things I encourage is often people, probably not anyone in this room, because you have opted in to be here, you have volunteered and said, I want to learn about this stuff. But we need the people who are saying no to lean in. We need them more than we need the people who got the pom-poms out. Because they're the ones that are going to help us understand and see the things that we couldn't see because we are blind to those. Because they exist within a different bias than we have. And together we can start mapping the terrain that will actually make this work at a larger scale. Because that is absolutely going to be what's necessary. I fully believe that there's going to be amazing things for the work that we have ahead, and that we can build amazing organizations, amazing ways of working, and that it's not going to be the threat that takes away all of our jobs. But it is going to be something that we have to tread together, not just separately. So hopefully you're with me on that one, and I want to say thank you very much for taking the time to be with me today. Thank you. Thank you. So we have about 8 minutes left. I got some great questions up here. So I have a feeling there's going to be some really good hard ones on here. First one, given a 10-fold acceleration in productivity from LLMs, Gen AI, how much time will it take us to AGI or even SGI? If not, what other AIs might? I'll be honest with you. I'm not going to try and navigate the AGI, SGI question. There's so many variables here that I could easily not be getting right. And I will fully admit I don't understand all the things I would need to do well by you in making that assumption. So I'll move to the next one. But what creative ways have you seen people use AI to increase productivity or even do completely new things that weren't possible before Gen AI became mainstream? I love that question because the time when we actually start to understand a technology is when something new that was completely impossible before that technology existed becomes commonplace. And what creative ways? Actually, I'll shout out my co-founder, Brent Peterson, who's not just an amazing creative, but an absolute just straight up genius. And he's actually the person who came up with the idea of codifying internal knowledge in the way that he did. And a lot of what you saw there was directly from his work. And I have seen him as an individual multiply himself so many times over the last 6 months because he spent the time and the work doing that, codifying his own intelligence, using his own documentation, and using that as a resource to become a thought partner with himself. Using AI to become a co-pilot and a real true collaborator that can help scale information and scale his productivity. Not replace it, not become some sort of generic content mill, but an actual extension of himself. And it's been fascinating to watch. And I'm seeing more and more of that happen. That these tools really do create new forms of creativity, and part of the jankiness of these tools actually becomes a creative constraint that also creates more creative work. So just because these tools don't work the way we think they should, or because they don't work like software, doesn't mean they're not as useful. In fact, they're kind of showing us the way into that next paradigm. Next one is, how many industries disrupted by surge skilling simultaneously seem problematic? Yeah. How do we prepare for so many industries disrupted at once? RC, great question. So yes, I said that there will be things that break. And that may be one of them. And I think every single industry is going to be hit by that. And it's not just going to be industries. Like, though, as individuals, that's going to be cognitively exhausting. I don't care who you are. That's not something we're used to. We're not used to having to relearn and relearn and relearn. How many of you are exhausted at the end of the day using AI a lot? Yeah, I mean, AI is great, but it's also really hard because you have to think strategically. You have to structure your thinking in a different way. You have to think through things in a different way, and that is computationally expensive. Your brain loses its resources very quickly when it uses AI. And when you have to learn things and relearn things several times over, that's going to be hard. So I would say a lot of industries will be disrupted by that, but it'll be a bit popcorn. Hierarchies are incredibly resilient. What recommendations do you have to disrupt that resiliency so followers can become leaders and vice versa? Great question. So 2 things can help that. One, when the teams become smaller and more decentralized, all of a sudden you change the dynamics of decision making. And when we look at change management and we look at building innovation inside of organizations, we don't walk in and say, hey, let's do an innovation project with 600 people in your company right now. Usually it's smaller teams broken off. You build a tiger team that is focused on a specific result, they have certain objectives, and they have a little bit of leeway to be carved off from the rest of the unit. Now what happens with that unit is they get faster results because they have the ability to manage their own oversight. They're also kind of given a little reprieve from the same metrics as everyone else. But what happens over time, if they are successful, is everyone else sees what's happening over here. And as that group becomes more and more successful, that becomes a proof point within the organization. Everyone says, I'll have what she's having. That is the kind of social proof you want within your organization, then to kind of move that into other places. It becomes the virus that doesn't get rejected by the host or the corporate immune system, but the one that gets accepted to become symbiotic with the host. If the biggest LLMs are going to commodify and the economic value will be 0, what will be the incentive so followers become leaders and vice versa? I'm not sure I understand the followers part, but I'm going to guess on the economic value 0. I apologize. If you can hit me up on either Twitter or LinkedIn and maybe hit me up with that question again, I will publish my answer on the social media. Let's jump to 2179. Oh, I like this. I know it's far. Where is humankind then? What are distant memories and what stuck with us through all this time? Ooh, that's a good one. I'll be back in a half hour. So what stuck with us? One of the hardest questions to answer is always what will not change, not what will change, because you can answer a million different ways with that. So 2179, we're looking at about 150 years from now. At that rate of change, within 25 years, by 2050, we'll be experiencing rates of change where every 5 years is kind of like 50 years now. So if that rate of change continues to accelerate, we're looking at probably the equivalent of 1,000 to 1,500 years of change. Ouch. I'm hoping to live to 120, so I'll be long dead. But what would be the same? I think we will be an interplanetary species by then. I think that we will probably have formed completely different societies and different values around it. I also think that we will have sectioned off and fragmented quite a bit. I think there's going to be some fragmentation around the choices that people make about how far they decide to intertwine with technology. There will be some people that decide to augment themselves with technology, all forms, whether that's embedded physically or even mentally. Brain-computer interfaces to, you can even talk about the singularity or bonding with mind and machine. I think there will be forms of that for sure. And there will be lots of people who decide to take varying levels of that type of leap. And some who decide not to do it at all. And I think that will actually be a larger differentiation between humans and individuals than nationality, geography, or language. What has stayed the same? I would love to say our humanity, but I don't know. I really don't. All right, we'll take it back a little bit. How should education change and evolve for the next generations? I want to first say that I have an enormous amount of empathy for people in education who are actually trying to mold the minds of the next generation. They're doing everything they can with absolutely nothing to support them. They've gotten hit harder than almost any other group by what AI has done because it's completely destroyed the function of their system without any really good options to move forward. Now they're making do, but we're still having to navigate kind of a group of options that aren't great. So how do we evolve for the next generations? Well, the first thing is I would go to first principles. When I think about the future of a specific type of education, let's talk about, let's say, the AP English paper or the critical thinking paper on a piece of literature. Usually it's an 8-page paper, something like that, about making a hypothesis and an argument that you explore over those 8 pages. Now, the goal isn't to write an 8-page paper, but if you were to go into most schools, you would kind of get that vibe that that's what they want. They want to see if the student can think for that long, write for that long, be that disciplined, and get that paper in. Rather than, are they able to take information given to them by this work and come to conclusions on their own that they can reason through? Now, I don't have to do that in Microsoft Word and print it out. That's something I can easily do using AI. I don't have to write a paper on Charlotte from Wuthering Heights in Word. I can actually feed that into an LLM and have a conversation with her and start to ask questions and start to actually come to a conclusion and build a hypothesis based on that interaction with the character. And that character could be designed not only from the book, but maybe historical writings and research that was also pulled together from when that book was written. And all of a sudden, as the teacher, I'm not just grading a paper. I can read through the transcript of that conversation and analyze and see, is this student integrating that information, modifying their assumptions, and coming to a well-stated conclusion based on that? Are they reasoning? You know, the thing that we all said is being destroyed by these models, we can actually create ways of reinforcing that, of teaching that. So I really think there are ways to look at education much differently than we do today. We've got 2 more. What success does an AI adoption look like? What does success in AI adoption look like? And what do we do when we get there? I don't think success in AI adoption is a final state. It's definitely a state of perpetual change. When you get there, that is really more about what does it look like to understand that your new normal is constant adaptation. You're okay with that. And finally, I know we're long. Machines, electricity were a big part of revolution. When we leave the thinking monopoly behind, do you think we're doing it in different places? Machines, electricity, a big part of revolution. I'm not sure I understand the question. So again, if you could hit me up on LinkedIn, shoot me the question, and I will also publish my answer there. So I just want to say thank you very much all for coming. This has been a wonderful experience with all of you. Cheers.